And there we go. We're live back again. Boyo alert, everybody. Welcome back.
Take two.
Take two. Shh. Don't tell them. Don't tell them.
Hello, Jules, sir. How are you doing?
Pretty well. Pretty well. I had a great morning. I am having a cup of coffee here, which works well, like similar to progesterone, protective for your body, like all the things I'm telling myself to just indulge in that. Other than that,
Fantastic. Well,
I had a breathing session.
let's make that good morning
meditation.
great then.
Yes. And we're gonna hopefully excel. I have something prepared today, which I find extremely exciting. And some things that clicked for me in the last couple of days. And I think it's sort of a mindset that I want to dive into in currently when things are picking up pace. And that's all it is about.
Oh, are they picking up pace? Are things picking up pace, Jules?
Yes. Well, like, at least in terms of information handling, those things are happening currently. So I want to give a bit of a counter view. Or at least like try to find some balance, like I'm always riffing about balance. Today we're going to talk about pacing, how life hides growth. So what are you seeing there, Les? What are you seeing?
A beautiful woman who, forgive my ignorance, but am I looking at Mary? Who am I looking at? Or just a random woman?
Oh, you're looking at Mary. Exactly right.
I knew. I always know.
Yes.
I always
you
know.
Always recognize her, don't you?
Yes. Behind those eyes, behind those blue eyes.
Yes.
This is our mother, Mary.
Yes. This is also image of growth and image of gestation. And I want you to keep that in mind when we go into like the next couple of slides on things. So
what do you think is the meaning behind, because immediately those thorns, of course, they spark my imagination. What does that symbolize, if I'm not getting ahead of ourselves?
Oh, that's an interesting
or am
take. Oh, maybe. Let's try to circle back to that later, okay?
Okay. Gotcha.
Sweet. Okay. Now, we're going to talk about pacing, and we're also going to talk about time in this regard. And something I found always interesting is how subjective time in some senses. And, we have these very strange relation to it. And I think we see that strange relation to it in, if you imagine this boy being here, Alexander the Great, for example. Mm-hmm. And you would ask yourself the question, did he have enough time? Or do you think he had enough time to live?
Wow, is it actually a question?
Yes. Right.
Wow, that's a really good question. And you and I actually spoke about this or touched on it in our previous discussion. Well, I guess he did, because he achieved his great work, mm-hmm. which was leading those campaigns all the way to India and implementing Hellenism in all those countries that then gave way to all kinds of fantastic cultural movements to spread quickly. So I guess he did have enough time to live, even though he died at a tragically young age. But maybe it wasn't that tragic after all.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't that tragic. That's sort of the point I'm getting at. Maybe there's something we need to consider, something else when we talk about time. We need to consider something that's not numerically valued in how we process time and life in general, because we have a very, very temporal understanding of it. And I think it's actually, some good indications why we have drifted from a more well-adjusted perspective to life in that regard. So let's jump right away. And I'm starting.
Color me intrigued, sir.
Let's start right away. So there's a quote, and it's by the sage Wainamoinen. I've pronounced it wrong. Also known as Höfendur, and from the Herva saga. And in God is the amount of the run, not the man's haste. Now, what does that mean? Or what mean? So I want to go into what is pacing here, and I want to start with what is pacing. So we have our idea what we have with haste is something that you go quickly, and we see this emerging currently in current times. It's like we are pushed, and we need to make things happen. And this is something that also is very dominant in the realm of how people envision their life to be productive. It's like they want to have productivity. And I want to split something here that is something I'm struggling with as well, because that's one of the reasons why I make this little lectures here, is I don't think that productivity or that haste and engagement are necessarily the same thing. And there's something that that we learn the more we look into nature, and the more we look into how things grow, that there's one thing that is engagement, and there's one thing that's like quote unquote productivity, and also flowering of life, but this is also a balance out with a certain pacing, with a certain understanding of how things are to flourish. And this is, we sort of see examples for that, when you disregard that, when people like grow too fast, or when you stress too much, or when you just not just engage, but you're always in such a haste that you don't have time for recovery, and that you don't have time for the proper engagement. And one image there which I see is plentiful in terms of how we process data, for example, how that takes it from life away. Imagine you're just you're taking amounts of data and you just become very cognitive about it. So you're taking lots of data. It's like all day browsings, all day Twitter, it's all day news cycles and whatnot. And the image I conjured up for that is like, instead of the vampire. Now, what the vampire does is takes away your life energy, and it takes away your time, like the time, how it's extending your, it takes away like how life, in a sense, it takes away life, because what it does is like inhibits you from engagement. And this is something, it's something that we currently, I think, lack, in the sense that how we engage things is different how we process things. And one thing, when you go into the realm of mere cognition, it's just processing, but it's not living it. And it's like, imagine Alexander the Great being like 24 and then just saying, well, I need to process like 10 more books, 20 more books, 30 more books, 50 more books. And it's just like, and he's just like, he's not going into life. And it's just like, hey, Socrates, can you tell me another lecture? And he's like, no, fuck off. And he's just,
and then one book opens up like another rabbit hole, and the whole thing
and he's just like, oh, well, that's really interesting. And that's really interesting. And this would then like, if his philosopher teacher would say, well, this is the right approach to go about living, then he would take this vampirical form, where it just gets him into the realm of mere cognition and not engagement. Like he saps his life energy. Like, imagine the life energy, the vitalism that he had would have been lost if he just would be like stuck in the realm of mere cognition. Now, that's the interesting thing. It would have given more time to him for live. It would have given him less engagement. So maybe how we conceptualize the time what we're dealing with is like sort of not correct.
So and also living itself, probably.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that gets us into something that I thought about, in terms of not only the way how you engage it, but also like how what does life strive for, in some sense. Like, boy, you're just going preposterous. But what does life strive for? And I think there's something to it that I think is more akin to growth, and this is something that's not really conceptualized that well in current understanding of evolution, I think. So imagine growth or flowering of life. Flowering of life, in some sense, is when we have evolution, you always say, well, you got to adapt to your environmental stimuli, they put pressure on you, and those you get adaptive, and this is how evolution takes shape. In parts, I think, and I think that's part of it. But I don't think it's in its truest form part of it, because when you look at gestation periods, for example, they inhibit flowering of life when you are under stresses. So if you have, for example, very classic example, like the shorter you are in a gestation period, or the shorter your child is in a gestation period, they gonna develop like less IQ, less height, They're going to be less prepared for life if the mother is under stress and thus has a shorter gestation period than they usually have. You can say, well, she's adapting to the environmental stimuli, which she is, because in times of stress, you want to quicken the reproductive cycle, so you have like more adaptation, so quote unquote, taking place. But you're also inhibiting that would be the flowering of life. It would be like, say, the high achievement, and they would both be for vitalism, they would both be for longevity, and they would both also be for, like processing abilities like a cube. So in some sense, what you're witnessing in terms of engagement is when you are under stresses or under stressor, like constant stressors, you're gonna have an adaptation, but that's not, doesn't necessarily mean that it's a positive adaptation for what is the flowering of life.
Now I see a very interesting like frame shift here, because I get it that it's evolutionarily advantageous that you shorten the reproductive cycle. At the same time, and maybe that's what we're getting at. I don't know, because I haven't seen this. I don't even know exactly what we're talking about because it's unfolding in real time. But this whole idea of like what you need to focus on, and in general the right frame is what's a good life instead of what's like more life in terms of more in terms of quantity, and you need to focus on quality. So let me, like, what I'm seeing here, and maybe it's just because I'm immersed in these topics right now, but even with logos, if you think about it, like the message is that do not fear. Like that's like almost a commandment, It's like, do not fear. Hey, but like there is scary stuff out there. Yes, but do not fear. But not even to shorten the reproductive cycle. No. Do not fear. Do not fear under any circumstance. And this is an interesting idea, because then, does that mean that my reproductive cycle is not that important? No, I mean, it probably is important, but it's not the most important thing. So instead of focusing on quantity, maybe it's all about quality. And I think that's also brilliantly like ties into what we're seeing now outside as well. But I mean, excuse me.
That's good. It's good.
Interrupt you.
No, it's good. It's good. This is perfect. It's actually what I'm aiming at. Well, one thing that you have when you say, well, do not fear, is you want, in some sense, want to structure the life that it allows. Well, this is like sort of, this is like the quantity, quality, or qualia dimension that you just outlined there. If you aim for the qualia dimension of like what would be peak vitality or vitalism, it would be where you want to structure it around that you're not imposed by stressors that gonna limit your growth. And this also are then again like self-imposed stressors, like not only the ones from the outside world where you just say, well, you see the pace, like quickening, and like in a similar way that you're like, there's something getting you to be more hasty, and maybe you're going to become stumbling. And this is very true in the sense that it's going to be stumbling upon your body, like it's going to pay a toll. Not only in your development, but also epigenetically, like in your child's development. For example, you see this in another domain. You see this like how stressors or like extreme stressors inhibit growth. They inhibit growth in terms of when they're when you cross them with like leisureness. So when you look, for example, in certain tribes in East Africa, and they have rituals where they, where the youth are getting sort of like a vision quest or something similar, where they have put an extreme stressor upon them, and this is their right to go into like the next stage, into adulthood. So depending on the severity of the stressors that are within this right, the height of the people is going to be stunted. Like the more extreme the right is, the less people grow into their adulthood, because the extreme stressor they're going to put into is forcing an adaptation towards like sort of quote unquote like quicker reproduction cycles, where they're just going to expect limited growth. Like in some sense, like the flowering of life is cut off when you just put an extreme stressors on it.
Yeah, this is so interesting because just like a short anecdote. While I was growing up, you were talking about child development. While I was growing up, my father wasn't really the kind of father who always told me stuff about right and wrong and instructions. It was more about like demonstrating or posing as a masculine role model,
Yeah.
but he did tell me some things, a few, and there are just things that you remember for the rest of your life. He says it only a few times or maybe once, and you remember that sentence because somehow it landed, somehow it has significance. And one of these memes that actually became a meme during my upbringing was "Don't be in a haste." I'm not even kidding. Like
I love it.
in Hungarian, in Hungarian, it's ne kopkod. Ne is no,
Yeah.
don't, and kopkod. So that's kind of like being in a hurry, but it's when you're also scrambling. It's like being
Yeah.
in a haste, literally.
Yeah.
And it was always like Lotzi, ne kopkod. Lotzi is me. It's like ne kopkod, always. And just like coming back to me. And I don't know why he found that like so important to just always communicate, like don't be in a haste.
So
So
that's probably
interesting.
the reason why you've grown so tall. It's just like it's just like
Maybe. Thanks, Dad. Yeah.
thanks thanks for the encouragement. It wasn't the milk. It wasn't the good meat or
No.
anything. It was just like don't hurry, and you're just like okay.
Like, all right.
so like we're gonna work from that frame shift a bit here from like what life is sort of like maybe sorting like striving for quality of existence and not only quantity, and like that also indicates that you need some leisure time in it. And the key for that, again, always is sort of the pacing. And you find that flowering of life and harmony is not found in haste but in pace. And there's a very interesting word root again for that, and where that comes from. And it comes from beta, from the Indo-European word root from to spread. So pace has the same word, has the same root in spreading and growing, like in expansion. That's the same word, expansion, expansive, fathom, pace, and also really interesting in the French word pas, like in pas de deux, like to dance. So you stepping. So what one indication like what pacing is also, you need to have the right steps or the right dance with life so it can grow.
That will determine the pace, and also that will determine the
Yes.
extent. It will determine the rhythm. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like the way to get a more attuned understanding of how life grows and how it spreads, like you need to find the pacing where you find the rhythms and like the notes of life and adjust for them. And this isn't haste. Like nobody likes like when they're doing a pas de deux or dancing with a partner and they are in haste, they miss the beats. It's just horrible. Like it's not
Yeah, it's ugly.
It's ugly. Like yes, you said, like it's ugly. You don't enjoy it. Nobody enjoys it. Not even like the people watching enjoy it. Like unless it's really funny, and it's the same thing. It's the same thing when you are people who are just tragically incompetent, like they don't pace life well, and then just get really funny when they just go from disaster to disaster.
Yeah, and it's like an accident. It's like it's hard
Yeah,
to look
you
away,
just
but
and you don't know why it's and you don't know why it's funny per se. Like but it's it's like the same thing as watching people dance and like stumble all over the music and don't have any rhythm in their life whatsoever. So that's the pacing of the dancing. So you allow the spreading of life. You like same thing. You need to have the melody right, and you need to have the melody understood and dance on top of it. So you actually hit those notes. And this is also related to. This is so interesting. When you had those summer days or summer holidays when you were a child, or like maybe even in the last couple of days or weeks when time was really strange, like at least for me, time was really strange, and it felt like there were like a period of 2 to 3 days where everything just changed from the like societal organization. Let's say like how much you're allowed to go into quarantine and whatnot. There was like 3 days where a lot of stuff happened in my city, and it felt like weeks.
Yeah, a lot was packed in it. Wow, this also ties into the idea of why when you are past 30, at least I've only heard that time just speeds up. It's like, wow, that was a breeze. But then growing up all the way up to 15, that looks like long time, because all these new things happening, and basically you just get used to it. So
Yeah,
time
and
contracts because of that, and then new things are happening. From your perspective, you experience it as longer.
yes, exactly. And that's the key. And that's the key. And that's the key why I think our framing of time is somewhat misguided. As for example, when we look at the
This is
example
so
for
fascinating.
Alexander the Great, like when you have higher metabolic rates and when you have higher, like a general arousal towards life, and this is not panic, this is more like focused, more like play, sort of. Your perception of time changes a lot. And those 3 days for me, they like, whoa, they extended to like what felt like weeks, because like I was engaged in so many things, I was engaged in so much change, I was
Yeah.
engaged in like fixing so many things around me, like with the people around me and whatnot, and also like observing life very closely in my city, how those things changed. And those, all these anticipations of novel experiences, like the higher metabolic rate, all of that leads to a different, like, of an elongation of time. And you see the same thing when people well studied, when people, for example, measure how long it takes for them to go home. Now, when they have the well-traveled route effect, when they have no engagement with the route that they are taking because they are familiar with it, they say it's the quickest road, even though there are other routes that are by themselves quicker to go home
Oh,
to.
yeah.
But because the time
Ah,
perception of them changes, because it's a novel experience, they're gonna say, "Oh, this takes longer," because it sort of does.
yeah, yeah.
And you always,
That's
yeah,
that's super interesting because I've been thinking about this too. When I'm not productive, so that means that during the day, I mean, I still live and breathe and eat and everything else.
yeah,
But when I'm not productive, then it's like, oh, the day is already over. Like, damn.
yeah,
But when I'm actually engaged doing the right things, I get exactly the opposite. I'm surprised, not because, oh, the day is already over, but hey, it's only like 1 p.m. I've done so much, you know? So it's and again, I have the same physical body. I'm occupying the same
yeah,
material space, but time somehow really seems to change. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's exactly it. It's like, how do you get most out of life? You engage it. It's like, how do you get the most time?
Mm.
Like, like you can put your clock on it, but like that doesn't matter, because what it
I don't know. It's
determines how.
pretty heretical, Jules. It's pretty heretical
Yeah,
because I
no.
thought that I thought that you get more life by just closing yourself off in your home and
Yeah,
eating
well,
eating soy and cockroaches. I don't know what you're talking about.
it shouldn't be stay home. It should be slay home, when you just engage everything at home
Yeah.
full force. Yeah, pretty much that. So like, how do you change that? And I really want to put that frame forward, and like for people like staying at home or whatnot, like like seek engagement and don't seek like sedation. And this is something I observed in terms of how, like, the trends that we had in the last couple of years, like they are putting into the max currently, because you're just like staring at glowing rectangles, and then you just order your food or you order your stuff. You don't go shopping, you don't go outside. It's just like all this very sedative lifestyle. It's been like, well, okay, now like it's got even more sedative.
Mm.
And that's really dangerous, like in terms of, it sort of like trips up your pacing, in the sense that you like, lets you slip from the engagement of life, something that you want to do,
Mm-hmm.
and to sort of sounds sort of counterproductive. But if you want to, like, for people who want to go, like, to want the carotene to fly by fast, like the best possible options, like to scroll Twitter 24/7.
Yeah.
Like there's no engagement, there's just information processing. But if you want to like make some like use of the time, and like use of time, lifetime in general, it's more like, okay, seek those engagement, and best possibly like seek it in a way that it also engages some sort of like creativity of the body, so you can
Mm.
merge it together.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Oh yes. And also the ties into this, like, play, I think. And this is, when we've talked about flow a couple of times,
Mm-hmm.
and how those days elongate, and how those, like, when you are really, you get a lot of life, or get a lot of time out of
Yeah,
life.
time dilates, but also time dial it at the same time, it kind of falls apart. So
Yeah.
you don't perceive the passing of time. It's just a lot of things happening, and it always feels like it's happening right now.
Yeah. 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 And so there we see like I want like shift away a bit from this mere, also very mere utility standpoint. Like there's a lot of need for joy to see that, like imagine like you're telling
Mm,
your body like that it's okay to be, like that it's like whatever it's facing, it's okay, because there's some certain joy and excitement and engagement out of it. And the worst thing that you can do is like put it into like um a glass bowl of fear and then shut it off, because then you just cut off all the joy. And this is the also again like the pacing, which not only like in state of flow you process the most information and like you learn the most stuff, but it's also a very quote unquote safe state. And it's so interesting that it's beyond the limitations of time, where it says, well, this engagement that you have with life is okay. And then it doesn't matter, like, then it doesn't matter how much like years you have, like putting them on the clock,
mm,
then it just becomes, well, this is relevant. Because like for Alexander the Great, what the amount of time, like perceptive of time he got out of life was probably like way more than most of the people that existed up until like the late 80s.
yeah. This is very interesting. Also, I see like flowering of life, embracing higher order patterns, because we talked about in the context of logos, it's like do not fear. But it also says, because I've been thinking about this, these things are not intuitive, because why shouldn't I fear? There are things that are scary out there that I should be careful of, no?
Mm.
So you see, it's like you need to peel away the layers behind
Yeah.
even a statement like do not fear. But also it tells you that actually the most important thing is to be joyful. And again,
Yeah.
it's like, really shouldn't the most important thing be to, I don't know, like shelter yourself from evil? Or no, it's like no, I mean that's important, but the most important thing is to be joyful. And probably because it's like the ultimate statement for life. This is it, like actually pointing at the fact that life is actually like how you live it, the aesthetics of that life that you're living,
Yes. And
and that's very interesting, because it's a quality shift. It's not about the fact that your heart is still beating, it's not about the fact that you're still breathing, which again is important, but that doesn't cover life in its entirety. That's like one aspect of life. Actually what life is, like the highest order pattern, is it aesthetic, is it beautiful, is it aesthetically
yeah.
pleasing, does it ring true,
Yeah.
like a song. So looking at life as a song, which is like, what is the best song? Is it the longest song? No, it doesn't matter. I mean, there are good long songs and there are good short songs, but that's just like entirely
I like that.
missing the point. Yeah,
That's probably like, and you gotta have your own song, and it's like, um it's it remembers me of when I do improvisation to songs, or I
yeah,
do like partnering improvisation, and I catch myself like I'm dragging out like certain moves because I don't know what to do next, and then it's like sort of, well, you're not in tune anymore, like you're like dragging out,
yeah.
like, come on, like pick up the pace, take the right pace, like you're like what are you doing there? It's just like reading another book when you don't need to. It's like
Yeah,
same
yeah.
thing. It's just on a micro level when you just do the dancing towards the song with a partner, and they can tell as well. They're like, "Hey, come on, like song's developing. Why you?
Yeah,
Why it's
yeah,
not you?"
exactly. And now I actually remember, because I used to read a lot of Alan Watts. I still love him to this day, even though it's kind of moved on from exploring Buddhism and Hinduism in that much
Mm.
depth. But I used to listen to his books all the time, and he actually brought this very specific analogy. Now it's just coming back to me that when it's it's a dance, you don't hurry to the end of it. Or when you're playing a song, it's like
Mm.
not only the fact that it's not about how long the song is, but you don't hurry to the end. It's not a
Yeah,
race to the end, and very interesting frame shift too, because now what we are in now, our current frame is that just go as long as possible
yeah,
and hurry, like, and also
yeah.
get there as quick as possible, like
And be
literally.
productive.
Yeah.
Be productive. Like read,
And
read like like Gary V mindset. Like just in order you have to do like 20,000 things at once.
Yeah.
Like post.
Yeah, smash things out, and make it long, and then just race to the end. And it's interesting that if you actually look at it and start to unpack it, it's exactly the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
Which always fascinates me, because it can be that we're missing the mark. It happens all the time. But when you look at these societal paradigms, and it always turns out to be that not only we're not doing the best thing, we're usually doing exactly the opposite. And it just makes you think, like, how did this come about? Very interesting.
And you always see it mirrored in, and I found it so interesting. You see it mirrored in, like, in the gestation periods of children, when it's just like race to the next one. It's just like, cut down the gestation period by 3 weeks. Well, you get another child, but that's not really that's not really the point of it. Like you want to have it beautiful. You want to have it healthy, like, in a sense. Like, that's how, like, when I say beautiful, is sort of like mostly what I'm mirroring. There's like, you want to have it healthy. Like sort of like this qualia development, or you make it stressful and like comes with a toll, sort of. So it's
also,
like
So go on.
No. It's like, also, this is the downside of it, when you say, like, what's the measuring stick? Like, the same way we apply, like, years to life, and say, sort of like, this is like sort of in us, our measuring stick is like, sort of, well, we've been very, very weak recently, or at least I have, and in measuring with something else that's just not, like, just quantitative, and just trying to
and you see, that's another interesting conversation. I don't know if it leads anywhere, but
okay,
if you think about it, I mean, it's not like a massive rabbit hole, but this whole idea of measuring, like, what am I measuring myself against? What am I measuring myself by? And that's an interesting idea, because you see, like, our hypothesis basically now is that you should measure your life based on whether it's beautiful or not, based on an aesthetic metric. Okay.
yes.
But that's not necessarily something that you can put your finger on, is it?
Yes.
Because it's much easier to say that 70 years, 80 years, my blood pressure is, I don't know, I don't even know how,
like,
I don't even know, like, an average blood pressure number.
Like 80 years, I've got 7 degrees, and I've read 20
that
books.
much money, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And this is something, and this is also quite telling, or might be quite telling, about our societal fever dream that we're living in. It's like, I'm measuring myself against these things because I think these are the things that are real.
Yeah.
Something that I can quantify, that I can put into statistics, statisticize. There's no word like statisticize, but I just made it up.
I love it.
Thing now. Yeah.
I love it. It should be a word.
Yeah. Jargonize and statisticize. So basically, you're measuring yourself against these things because this is also a statement that you're making, that I think this is real. And then it ties into, it's much scarier to measure yourself against something like beauty, because first of all, you're probably not familiar with it, because there's no beauty in your life.
And it needs taste.
Also, yes. And also because you can't you can't produce or even experience beauty in a haste. Like, you need to, by definition, you just can't. It's an irreconcilable conflict. So you need to slow down, which is probably not going to happen with people right now. But that also, plus with this, it's a much harsher judgment that, look, you know what, your life is ugly. That's very, very harsh. And it's also something that you need to have courage to, even to attempt it, even to just take a shot at it. Because again, it's much less certain in a way. So it does require some sort of a leap of faith, because it doesn't require a leap of faith to, no, I want to do my like third degree,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I get it. We probably need to work hard and work long and also hurry the fuck up. But but also it doesn't mean that it will be beautiful. And also the prescription for beauty, that's much more ephemeral, that requires actually authenticity from you. That's also the other thing, because people don't like to be authentic. Being authentic is scary. And I mean, you have to face yourself.
Yeah.
And then you need to put that out in the hope
Yeah.
and having faith that it will produce beauty. And
it's
it will
also
either work or it won't. Yeah.
very, very contemplative exercise in a sense, when you just like
Mm.
you're measuring, when you ask yourself, well, what in my life is ugly? Yeah, it's just like, kind of harsh, yeah,
Yeah.
but it works surprisingly well, I think, when you just say, well, this shifts more towards like quality, and then it's not so much like getting your reps in and whatnot, and it's more about this flowering, like where am I inhibiting the flowering, or where am I pacing wrong? And it will also tell you, I think at least, pretty much like things that you haven't looked at, like very
Mm.
and this might be on a general level, like towards what am I having good relations with my family, or with friends, or have I been, or like romantic relationships and whatnot. But it
Mm.
will then say this higher order principle, like in the flowering of life, and you can see, or maybe not see, but maybe it shifts more towards a feeling of an intuition, where you say, well, it could be something developing, sort of
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote, into this higher order principle, but I need to feel out into regions where it's just like missing the ground of it. Like I think in some sense, like maybe it's an analogy, in the same way that like a tree develops and grows, like you're laying down those foundations of what beautifies your life when you are looking into those fundaments where
Mm.
there could be something rotten, or like it's not stable enough, and then you
Mm.
stabilize that, and then that which grows will, if it gets the roots in all the right places and is stable, like it will grow by itself if you let it flower. And that's the
Yeah,
pacing
exactly.
again. It's like once you hit the rhythm of a song, and you hit it well, and you are in the flow of it, like you're gonna hit the next notes as well.
Oh, and this is also a good analogy, because you need the right beat. You
Yes.
need the right beat in the background. And now, even if I think about, because now staying at home for months and working with the habit implementation and execution and all that stuff, that's like kind of the beat. That's the beat that you have, that you need to
Yep.
follow. And it's also a frame shift from I'm creating through this process of making things happen, or I'm more like planting the seeds
Mm.
and then just seeing the
Yes.
flowers grow. That's a shift. And also, this is personally very difficult for me, because I see and I experience the value in actually acting out of pure will, and enforcing things to come to be. Because look, if you need to compare this with absolute ineffectiveness and weakness, well, it's
Yeah.
definitely better to have some will, and to be able to bring things to being. But then I think it's still missing the mark, because
Yeah.
when you go through this frame shift of, no, I'm just going to do the right things. What are the right things? It's like, waking up, making my bed, like doing breathing exercise, whatever is the right thing for you, whatever are the right habits for you, then the flowers will grow.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily intuitive. And another interesting question might be, I mean, I don't have kids, but probably the question is that, would you wish your child a long but miserable, a long and ugly life, or a short but joyful and beautiful life? And again, it's probably a simple question, but I don't know. You can also ask it probably thinking about a loved one of yours. It's a difficult question, I guess, but I don't see anyone saying, no, I want my child, or I want my partner or my friend to have a long and miserable life, and then looking at it that way, aside, not relating to yourself, I think it shows this even in a more profound way, that it's about just making that beautiful song, finding the beat, finding your narrative, like what's the story that you want to basically develop and demonstrate and sing and dance, and then just do that,
and get the taste developed along with it, because you probably don't know like what's your reading. Because something I struggle with always is like developing taste always means that you have to try it out, like somehow. Like if you draw something or if you dance to certain songs, it's all like you're getting closer to it. Like what would be your taste and your manifestation of aesthetics. But it's always like, you're getting close to it and then you drift away from it and you're getting close to it and you drift away from it. But it's just, you're always circling around it. Something that also is and you just like become what you are is sort of where you're just getting closer to it. And this is good enough.
You can't ever kind of reach it. I mean, ultimately you probably can, but the whole idea is that you are just approaching it, you're trying to, because it ultimately, and that's the other thing, and maybe that's for another conversation, but what you are aiming to achieve is perfection. But by definition, you being an imperfect being, you can, but the whole idea is to strive for it, is to hold that as an aspiration, that I'm moving towards that perfect ideal. And that's where, again, the leap of faith is kind of necessary, because look, that you are an imperfect being, that you're not capable of perfection per se. That actually causes a lot of issues when you're a perfectionist, and that actually freezes you. You can't act because you're in this illusion that you need to achieve perfection. But then, okay, I don't, but I still need to walk towards it. And there needs to be a promise, in the end, that somehow it will work out and it will be like that perfect symphony.
It's
and
also,
now we were actually talking about like the afterlife and stuff, but that's maybe for another day.
But it's also like to keep this very grounded. It's also a matter of scale. Like one of the reasons with something occurs to me is like it's a matter of scale in a sense. Like you can scale upward always. Like you can fix something, then you can scale upward. And this is also, imagine you're an architect and you're designing this beautiful piece. Like in what level are we looking at? Sort of quote unquote perfection or beauty here. It's like maybe he started with this. He started with the Pantheon type shape in the middle, and then it's just like, okay, I can add something else onto it, and then he adds the towers, and then it's like, wow, this looks really beautiful, so add more to it. Then I add the courtyard to it, and I add the second building to it. The developing of this, and then like the end, like when you're looking, like if you're like a grandiose architect, you just say, well, I'm gonna build all this, and this one is next in the background, and this, and I'm gonna like craft the whole landscape. But you still start, like maybe with something like a singular pillar. And this is how you can say, you develop your aesthetic sense of beauty. You develop like sort of a quote unquote perfection by scaling it upward. And this is also what we see a lot in architecture that we find so fascinating, because it's with the great churches. It's like you have these minuscule say altars or anything inside the church. They're already beautiful, but it's a small thing. But then you extend outwards, and it's like the pillars are also beautiful, and they're surrounded, and then you extend even more outwards, and then it's just the churchyard as well, and then it just grows from there and grows from there. And so this whole development is like the way how you perceive that sort of fractal
dude, I'm getting
aesthetics.
like this is so good, because now I think about if you relate that to your life, it's the whole idea is that you need a solid foundational piece in the center. So you can have good skills, and you can do all kinds of shenanigans, but if the core is rotten, if the core is ugly, the whole thing will collapse. It's that whole idea of building your castle on sand. And ultimately, if you don't start with the right intentions, you can think about even your life as like, you need to have the right artistic intentions if you want to achieve, if what you want to achieve is beauty. Because if what you want to achieve, again, is quantity and more years, well, you don't need a solid foundational piece. It can be a festering wound. And probably, by the way, if that's your life, you can probably trace it back to a festering wound in the depth. But like, okay, you take something beautiful and you build on it. Now, I'm just having this thought about, because you mentioned the churches, and I couldn't help but relate to the whole idea of St. Peter's Basilica, in Rome. Okay, so it's like one of the most beautiful architectural achievements that we've ever had. It's really, the scale of that thing is absolutely breathtaking.
Yeah.
And this is closely connected to, because how I look at the church even, so just the idea as the church itself, I see it as I see it as sacred architecture. So the patterns that are being enforced, or maybe I can say that the actual church itself is a human institution, so it will be imperfect. It is a little bit imperfect, but at the same time, the patterns in them are sacred. That's the whole idea. So I'm just looking at the whole story now. The Christian story of Jesus says that, hey, this is the perfect architecture, this is the perfect shape and form. And the story is that he tells Peter that you are the rock on which I'm building my church. Okay, so if you think about it this way, like, this will be the most beautiful building. That's the idea in the story, that this is the most beautiful building, and I'm building it on you. You are the rock. And here's the twist, and this is what I'm just seeing as making the imperfect perfect, which we humans are not really capable of. We're trying. And look, Peter denied Jesus 3 times, and he knew it. Jesus told him that, look, you'll deny me 3 times. I don't want to get too Christian on this, by the way, but it's just stay with me, stay with the anecdote. Yes. And it's like, you will deny me 3 times before the cock crows. And he did. And then, of course, he was converted, and in the end, he died a martyr's death. He was crucified upside down, because he said, I'm not worthy of being crucified just in a regular fashion, like my master. I need to be crucified upside down. But the point is that he was imperfect, and basically what they did is look, you are the foundational rock. On you, I'm building my church. And you have Peter, the grave of Saint Peter is actually at the center of Saint Peter's Basilica. Like right in the center. So if you look at the dome and you trace the center of the dome all the way down to the basement of that structure, you can find Saint Peter. He is right there. Now what I see, and maybe it's not correct, but that was actually an attempt to show that, look, imperfection made perfect, embracing who you are, still being imperfect, that's okay, but it can be made perfect, and this is how it's done. And this is kind of just the idea represented in an artistic way. Like, why is that so important? Why not focus on the functionality of that basilica?
It's also something you see in the sort of, you see it sort of also in Greek poetry or in the Iliad, where you say, well, you have and this is so interesting, that's been fascinating for people, or that for me certainly, when reading about it, like, it beautifies death, like no other poem is like, well, the absolute imperfection of man, like, you're gonna wither away, and it beautifies it. It's like, oh, that's interesting. And it's the same thing that you just said there. It's acknowledging of that can lead to, say, with the engagement and the solution of it, quote unquote.
This is so good, because I'm not thinking about the Iliad as well. Again, I think we have a problem of imperfection in general as human beings. I mean, imperfection. If you
look at us, hey?
Yeah, if you look at history and you look around at any point in time, what you see is, fuck, we're imperfect. And that imperfection, it manifests itself, well, mainly as conflict. I mean, if I want to take a Girardian lens, it's about mimetic desire. So we want the same things, which lead to conflict, which lead to violence, which leads to scandal, about like war and atrocities, sacrificing people, victimizing people. And the problem is, at the end of the day, is war. It is violence. Somehow we have violence. I mean, it wouldn't necessarily need to be the case, if you think. I mean, for us, it's like water. We take it as a human universal, which it is. But why should it be the case? Why should it be the case that we are making life hell for each other? And that's the problem. We're trying to articulate the problem. Like, that's the issue, because there is war, like blood is flowing in rivers, and we're suffering. And we're trying to, like, what can we do? I mean, we can try to suppress it. It doesn't work. We've seen it. It just gets worse. So the human attempt, and look, even this is also this also shows how futile, for example, communism was. It was already like, you know, in the 1800s, 1900s. And by that time, we already figured it out that that's not the way to do it. It's not about removing that and changing human nature, because even if you think about these old myths, or these legends like the Iliad, what is it trying to do? And it's brilliant, because if you read the Iliad, there are parts of it, I mean, it's pretty visceral, it's pretty gritty, you know, it really shows you war as it is. It's pretty ugly. It actually tells you about the people. It goes into depth into, hey, this was, I don't know who, Adonius. There's no Adonius in Iliad. I just came up with a random Greek name. But his father was someone, he lived on this farm, and then he dies, and he dies quickly, and it's ugly. But then this whole attempt at, like, what is glory? Because what we see is that glory will justify this violence.
Yes.
You know, that's the remedy. We're trying to figure it out. We can't do away with it, because there is violence and there is blood and there is suffering. What do we do about it? We try to recontextualize it. We try to reframe it with glory in battle, for example. And might I add that even the Passion of the Christ is an attempt at that. Look, it's the ugliest violence you can imagine. You know, it's literally torture designed to cause the most suffering possible to human beings, inflicted upon an innocent being. And what it does is that there is all this most, like, disgusting violence that you can imagine, and it's made into one of the most beautiful stories, or some people think it's the most beautiful story of all time. But made
short disclaimer there.
Yeah. And it makes it transcendently beautiful, you see. And then that's real art. That's super interesting.
Okay, and to give this, you know, to wrap this up in some sense, is also, I thought about this, and I hope you can see the whole quote.
What is courage?
What is courage? And I thought this is related to the Stoics, and they have a word for courage, like what it is, where it comes from. It's called eudaimonia, the art of flourishing in stoicism, life in accordance with nature. And this is the pacing. Like, courage is that which allows you to be in pace and to be in rhythm with your own nature and in flowering with it. So it's less about putting yourself into constraints of, you know, time, let's say, or, like, you know, like quantifying things, but it's how do you, as we established before, like, how do you feel the rhythm? And this is very interesting, because that frame of courage is very different than we see when we look at, you know, like some movies, like which I really enjoy, 300 or whatnot. But this is, the courage in there is more like, okay, this is a devotion to flowering of life. And this is also a devotion to flowering of life. You know, like, there's still going to be fear around it, but it's a different fear that's not related towards, you know, existential, I say, let's extinguishment, or just, you know, but it's more about serving life itself, you know, in accordance with nature, serving that flowering. And if you think about yourself, like, serving, like, whatever your gestation period for growth is, you know, and then you see it's like, maybe you have another rhythm, you know, like, people gonna have different rhythms in how their life develops. And I think this ties into the individuation that we have with Jung as well, where you would have also clients that would, you know, have extensive long lives, and some would have very young, you know, short lives, but they had just had a different rhythm. You know, whatever their flowering in life was, it was their own, in a sense. It was very unique in their pacing. And to give a last quote, especially in, you know, when we are very uncertain about pacing in general, is from Ecclesiastes, which I really like. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? And I want you to keep this in mind in times, you know, like accelerating pace or whatnot. It's more like, well, if you are observant about this, is it shocking? Is it new? Is it really? Is it something really that changes a lot? Maybe it's just something that tries to get you, or that, you know, it's sort of it sort of could be a dent in your rhythm or in your tune.
Oh yeah,
but it doesn't really matter.
Shiny object syndrome. I'm so guilty of that.
Yes.
I'm so guilty of that, and
Super.
and it's also like so interesting that this idea of the beat. Like, first of all, what this suggests, what we just laid out, is that ultimately the best way to live the best life you can have is to live a life of service, meaning that it will serve this higher purpose, regardless of like your own pace that you would, because maybe you'd be in a hurry, or maybe you'd be too slow even. But no, it needs to be in service of that great work that you that you need to achieve, whatever.
And this also
that is.
serves yourself, like, or frame it different. It serves the self, if you want to put it like a Jungian.
Yes, serves the self. And look, this is a genius idea, because again, by being too focused on your own self-will and being focused on achieving as much as possible, that's not it.
Yeah,
that's not it. So it's counterintuitive that no, I need to be in a state of service. I know that for me, this was like impossible all my life. I mean, whenever someone told me anything like that, hey, live a life of service, I was like, fuck off. No, what do you want me to be? Like weak? Do you want to submit me? Do you want to subvert me? But no, this is the idea of I need to switch into service mode, in a way. And I mean, also thinking about this idea of pacing, because for some reason lately, the idea of beating the war drums is just an image. It's just an image that it's flashing to me randomly, But what are the war drums? Is it like beating it as quickly as you can?
Oh yeah.
It's like giving the beat and pick up and then align with the beat. Yeah. I'm giving you the beat so that you can be the strongest that you can be. This is the whole idea of, even maybe again another conversation talking about soldiers. It's also like a soldierly thing. It's like beating the war drums. Very interesting.
Yeah. All right. And I think that wraps it up perfectly. Like, find your beat, boys.
Find your beat. Find your boyo beat. Yeah.
Find your rhythm. And this is pretty much it. I think there's it's a quite a nice.
Yeah, this was good, Jules. Sweet. Thanks for bringing it. I had literally no idea what this will be about. Like, I didn't even. I mean, as far as I was concerned, we could talk about yoga or talk about whatever. But
yeah, I just started this morning, but it was a good research. I loved it. Just some thoughts flashing into my mind the last couple of days. So sweet.
Yeah, brilliant, bro. Thanks for putting it together, boys. Thanks for watching. See you next time, I guess.
Bye. There we go. Not yet. I think at some point I'm gonna figure this out.
I think it's good now. Let me see. Yeah. No. I think it's still recording, Jules. I think it's still recording.
Okay.